My guess is this is not the first how to crosshatch video you've watched. There are lots of videos that basically have the title How to Crosshatch, and they show something such as what you're looking at now, a series of boxes into which hatching patterns are drawn, a series of parallel lines close together at a certain angle, or crosshatching where we layer the hatching over the top of earlier hatching at different angles. And these videos often encourage us to do the same thing, to practice crosshatching with a sheet of paper and maybe a dozen boxes, exploring the effect of drawing them at different angles. And depending on our personality, this can be a very satisfying thing to do or a very tedious thing to do. But in the end, we get our boxes full of lines and we feel like we've done it, we know it. Quite possibly, they also show some hatching patterns on a cube, a sphere, and or a cylinder. And so now we're left thinking that, okay, this is what cross-hatching is. I know how to do it. I've practiced the technique, and now I'm ready to hatch in my drawings. The problem is, when we go to hatch in a real drawing with a real scene, we discover we have no idea where to start. We have no idea how to jump from a square box with basically a geometric pattern of lines on it into hatching in a natural landscape scene or a complex architectural structure. And we're often left feeling, well, pretty stupid, because we've watched the video, we've understood it, and now we have no idea how to use it. And so we presume that I'm the problem, that I'm just not clever enough. And it never occurs to me that the problem really is the video, not my ability to understand crosshatching. That crosshatching itself is pretty basic. It's very simple. Lines and lines over lines. The problem is in how we apply this basic technique. And any demonstration in the video has probably been a very, very oversimplified one. And the video hasn't told me what it hasn't told me. And so I'm left presuming that it's done its job and given me a thorough enough understanding of it. But how to crosshatch is not really the question I need to ask or I need the video to tell me. The real question, the educative one, the question that will lead me to be able to apply a very basic, simple technique of putting lines on the paper to the real world complexity is actually, what am I trying to do in my drawing overall, and particularly what am I trying to do in the part of the drawing where I'm considering cross-hatching as a technique that I might use. It's the effect I'm wanting to create in my entire scene, which may only be a fraction drawn at this point, as well as what am I trying to create in this part of it. What emphasis or effect am I wanting to happen through the ink I put on the paper in my drawing? This is the question I need to be asking to make the question of how to use the cross-hatching in my drawing just fall into place. Hatching is a tool in our drawing toolbox, but how we use a tool always depends on the job that we're doing. It depends on what needs to be done. So am I using the hammer to position the nail before I start? Or am I using the hammer to drive the nail in? Am I using the hammer in conjunction with something else to countersink the nail? Or am I using the hammer, in fact, to remove the nail? Because the way I use my tool will change according to the particular job I want to use it for. So how I use cross-hatching as a tool depends on how the overall finished drawing needs to look and the part that this particular bit of the drawing I'm doing now will play in the finished drawing. It's what we're trying to do with the tool that determines how we use it. And fortunately, I'm better at drawing than I am at carpentry. But to make it more difficult for us to work out how do I want to use hatching in my drawing, what purpose can it fulfill, what function, is the fact that in these how to crosshatch videos, we really only see one purpose, and that's to create shade or shadow in our scene. And this is only one way we can use crosshatching, one out of many. Because if we think when we're drawing from a photo, we're basically copying the photo, I believe that's a totally inadequate way of looking at what we're doing. In fact, I think it's an impossible task, which really sets us up to fail. I think more that we're translating something that we see in the photo into something that we can create using whatever we're drawing with, in this case, a fine liner pen. So when I look at my photo, I'm thinking, what do I want to create? Well, I want to create a sense of the Australian bush. I'm wanting to create a sense of the distance from those steps that are closest to us to the very furthest things we can see. I want our viewing to be channeled along the pathway and weaving between the rocks and the trees. I'm wanting to create a sense of 3 dimensions of the rocks. I'm wanting to have the drama of dark values, the attention-grabbing nature of dark values. But I also want the contrast of white paper to make the dark values look even darker. I need to somehow create this tangle of undergrowth so that it can be clearly visible as that, even though I can't draw the detail. So there's going to be a lot of drawing the effect of detail. Now, there is some very clearly obvious shade on some things, particularly those trees on the right-hand side. There's not so much shadow that we can readily identify as shadow. But I'm also trying to make some things clear against a very cluttered background. So look, all of these things are all my purposes. I've got some edges I need to try and make look weathered and worn. I have all these things I want to do in my drawing, and hatching is a way of achieving this. In fact, I've got 10 separate ways I use hatching to create certain effects when I draw. I've chosen a number of drawings that here show different ways I use hatching to create different effects. Some of them fairly simple and straightforward, and some of them more complex. The question is not what direction are my lines. The question is what effect do I create by the direction of my lines, by the way I layer them on top of each other, by the way I position them next to each other. I actually have 10 different ways I use cross-hatching for different effects, for different purposes in my drawing. I suggest that you pause the video in between each one and really have a good look and really try and work out how would this have looked different if the lines had been angled a different way or in some way arranged differently. Because it goes way beyond shade and shadow, the things that I'm doing with my hatching. And I do have a video where I go through the 10 ways I cross-hatch, or the 10 ways I use cross-hatching in detail, with an example for each one highlighting that particular use. And I published that video about a month ago, and at the end of this, I will make the end screen a link to that video. So if you'd like to hear me outline these 10 different ways I use cross-hatching, then that's the place to go. But the important thing to realize is that when we ask about what direction should the cross-hatching be, we're asking the wrong question. The tool doesn't tell me what I should be doing. What I should be doing tells me what tool to use. So if I make an effort to work out before I start to draw, what effect do I want to create from this drawing? How do I want my drawing to look, to impact people? How much drama do I want in it? How do I want people's eyes to come in and move around? All of these things. What effects, what edges am I trying to create? All of these things, hatching gives us possibilities for. So if I'm aware of what I'm trying to create, it's actually quite simple to choose the way of hatching that will help make this possible in my finished drawing. It's such a problem that we rush to start a drawing before we've visualized how we want it to look, before we've thought about what is the purpose that I want visually from the marks I put on the paper, from the hatching, from lots of little small parallel lines. They absolutely create this mountain scene. They even create the snow by where we don't put the hatching, and they're rounded to reflect the underlying form of the mountain. We can get a complexity with hatching that's impossible to create on silhouette edges if we try to draw a continuous outline. Some of my drawings are basically all hatching. There's very little what we'd call line or outline, I suppose, line in an outline sense, but it's the hatching that basically creates the scene, creates the values, creates the liveliness, the interest, the drama in what we see. But trying to visualize the drawing before we start it is key to doing this. I'm not trying to copy the photo. I'm just using the photo as a starting point, as a foundation, as a springboard for how I can now creatively interpret it through the device of my pen, through black ink on paper that's delivered in thin lines and marks. And it's hugely creative. Hatching is actually a wonderful means of creating things. How could I have created this waterfall, this fountain waterfall effect, except through hatching? Sometimes it's where we don't hatch as much as where we do hatch. And of course, there's nothing wrong with using hatching for shade and shadow, as I have amongst other purposes in this scene. But ironically, hatching is just as important for creating the effect of light as it is for creating the effect of darkness. And hatching doesn't have to be heavy and dark. It can be light and delicate and create other effects as well through that, as in this drawing of one of the cottages on Marie Antoinette's farm at Versailles. Hatching is incredibly diverse. In fact, often it's the only way I could draw lots of scenes, particularly natural scenes. But it's not just the value areas, it's the in effect edges. Look at the hatching that's created this dirt road and the edges of it. And of course, how could we draw trees without hatching? Hatching fulfills so many purposes. I hope you're getting an understanding of why asking what direction should I hatch is the wrong one. It's always what effect am I trying to create, and that will guide me into choosing the best directions for hatching and the best placement of the hatching and the best intensity of the hatching. This drawing is virtually all hatching. The drawing's pretty much brought out entirely by hatching, and it's pretty much the same with this one. Hatching can be a time commitment, but that's okay if we like drawing. You can see that I haven't slavishly followed the photo in the values I've created. I've simplified them a bit and created a stronger central light beam, light shaft that in my mind is just a bit more dramatic. But basically all the effects I've created here have been created through hatching, including creating the effect of the grasses in the lower right, even though they're in shade. How would I have done that any other way? You can see why I say now, hatching is my friend. So let's stop asking, how do we cross hatch? What direction do we hatch? And instead be thinking, what effect am I trying to create for the purpose of this drawing that I have? And visualize the drawings before we start. When we do that, it falls into place how the hatching is done and where it goes. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope this has been helpful for you. I hope you can see now why I think drawing is my friend. But look, in the end, whatever you draw, however you draw it, however you do or don't use hatching, make sure you have fun. Bye.